Good afternoon. Welcome to today's SCA webinar with Srini Prasad. He'll be speaking on maximize company value with the right subsurface developments. Before we start today's webinar, I would like to ask some polling questions of the audience. And so I will launch the first poll. What is your primary discipline? So it looks like we have some geoscientists in the audience and some petroleum engineers. Some people are still logging in, but the numbers keep going up. Looks like the majority of you have voted. So I'm going to close that poll and share it. 60% geoscientists, and we have 20% petroleum engineers and 20% other. So now I will ask the next polling question. How many years of full-time experience do you have in the upstream oil and gas industry? Looks like we have quite a few people with over 30 years experience. The majority are in the middle. In the 11 to 20 years experience, we have 50%. So I have a couple more polling questions. How many years have you spent working on unconventional shale reservoirs? So we're getting responses. Most of you have voted. It looks like all of you are in the less than 10 years, with 67% being in the 1 to 10 years and 33% being less than 1 year. And so our last polling question is, how many years have you spent dabbling in the upstream applications of digital transformation? So we're starting to get to responses. A lot of people don't have much experience. We have a lot of people with less than 1 year. And most of you have voted, and I'd say the majority have less than 1 year at 67%. So thanks for responding to those polling questions. And I'm going to share my desktop. And before we start today's webinar, I'd like to introduce Srini Prasad, and I'd like to remind the audience that you are muted, so you can ask questions during the presentation using the Go to Webinar question feature, and we will cover the Q&A at the end of the presentation. So today's webinar is entitled Maximize Company Value with the Right Subsurface Development. Our speaker is Srini Prasad, and Srini is a reservoir engineering consultant. He has extensive experience with several operators, Hess, BP, and Oxy, has worked in multiple basins around the world, a variety of different types of reservoirs and fluid types, including unconventionals and conventionals, and light oil, heavy oil, and gas reservoirs. You can see the basins he's worked around the world and the various types of technology and problem-solving challenges he's encountered. Most recent position was Chief Reservoir Engineer at Hess. He's received multiple awards, holds 2 US patents, and has a variety of presentations covering diverse topics. He has an MS in Chemical Engineering from University of Houston, Bachelor's in Technology and Chemical Engineering from Indian Institute of Technology in Kanpur. So the class that Srini is teaching for us, from which this webinar is derived, is entitled Maximizing Oil and Gas Exploitation by Leveraging Subsurface Excellence, Innovation, and Digitalization. This will be offered for the first time next year in late January. It's in a live online format. We've introduced these virtual classes in response to the pandemic. And so you can log in from anywhere in the world and participate. Houston time in the morning, maybe different times in different parts of the world. And you can see the course description listed here. There's a second class offered that same week on a different topic, developing robust production forecast do's and don'ts. And again, this is a separate class, but same time period, half days in the last week in January, delivered virtually. So you might want to take both of these classes. So look to our website for more information. You can find information about all our classes on our website, and we can schedule classes in-house if you have a group that you would like to do it with you together. And we do have discounts for people who are in career transition. I will be speaking in our next webinar in December. My co-author is Rob Taylor, and Rob and I wrote a paper for the SP Annual Technical Conference, and we will have an expanded version of that talk. So we'll be talking about addressing the leadership gap in energy industry. Rob works for IHRDC, and he'll give some examples from their work, and I will give examples from the Dan Tierpach Geological Certification Program, otherwise known as the Boot Camp. So hopefully you'll be joining us in December for that webinar. We have a number of online classes scheduled in January if you're already doing your planning for next year for career development. John Foster will be telling us about Python. We've already mentioned Srini's 2 classes, they're listed, and then I have a class on the basics of the petroleum industry. So remember SEA when you're thinking not only about training, but about consulting, projects and studies, and direct hire services. So I'm going to pass the presenting rights to Srini, and you should have it now. It's all yours.
Thank you. Can you see my screen, Susan?
Yes, we can.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot, Susan. As most of you should be aware, the subsurface is the foundation of an upstream oil and gas company. And in order to maximize value in the upstream exploitation world, you need to not only make sure that you work on the right subsurface developments, but make sure that you also get it right. Okay, my slide is not advancing here.
So you can try taking it out of show mode.
Okay. All right. Okay, great. Thank you. Here's a listing of the topics that I would like to cover today. I'm going to begin by giving you some of the highlights of the class that I'm planning to teach next year. So main objective of the class is to provide some guidance and examples of how to maximize the value of exploiting conventional and unconventional reservoirs by leveraging subsurface excellence, innovation, machine learning, and AI. The reservoir rock and fluid characteristics are key to getting the best returns on your investment. If you're stuck with a high viscosity oil in really tight rock, then it can be a big challenge. A key financial metric is obviously the cost per barrel. And subsurface excellence, innovation, and digitalization are critical to increasing the denominator of this financial metric. We're going to talk about what has changed in our industry, give you a framework to select the right development concept, do the development right, and meet and exceed the sanction promise in terms of the recoverable volume, the production profile, cost, and schedule. You need to look at all 4 elements. Then we'll discuss a systematic methodology for identifying options to maximize the ultimate recovery. And then we're going to present several case studies of applying these principles to maximize exploitation value. This slide lists some of the key learning outcomes of the class. You will learn about some of the best practices and innovations in both the traditional and digital arenas. In today's session, I will touch on the bullets which are highlighted in green on this slide and on the previous slide. The objective is really to kind of give you a flavor of what to expect in the class. Okay, so what has changed? So imagine you're sitting in a movie theater watching the movie Aladdin, and you are listening to the theme song when Aladdin takes the princess out for a ride on his magic carpet. Unfortunately, I can't show you the words of the song because the Disney guys may come after us, and I can't sing worth a damn. So here are the words of the song. It is a whole new world, a new fantastic point of view. It's a whole new world, a dazzling place I never knew. Well, it is a whole new world for the upstream oil and gas industry. I want to talk about a couple of events and issues that are and will have a major impact on the upstream business. The first one is the advent of digital rock technology. Digital rock technology allows us the ability to image and visualize things at different scales. This has allowed us to not only see what is happening in the fluid displacement process in cores, for example, but also understand why it is happening. This is a key development. Then you obviously have machine learning and artificial intelligence, both of which are making a huge difference in enhancing our understanding of the subsurface. But of course, at the end of the day, you need to make sure that the algorithms are based on the good old principles of physics. At the end of the day, I believe it will be a combination of human machine units, perhaps sometimes maybe more machine than human, that will actually run the show at the end of the day. The other day, I went jogging and I saw this sign. And when I looked closer, it wasn't for a lost dog, it was for a lost drone. Believe me, it is a whole new world. The other event which has really made a huge impact on our industry is the exploitation of unconventional shale reservoirs. It's not a novelty anymore. However, most of the action is taking place in our country, and the rest of the world, is catching up. But if you look at what is happening in the unconventional space, most of the operators are currently in what I call is the drill baby drill, frack baby frack mode. And in the process of doing that, we are leaving a lot of oil behind. So there is a lot of work to be done in this arena. Companies which don't embrace the changes will be left behind. You need to make sure you're not like the knight on that horse. Now let me say a few words about what is the driver. The key to sustaining the long-term health of an oil and gas company is to make sure, A, that you have a portfolio of reservoirs with healthy subsurface characteristics. By that I mean great rock and oil characteristics. It's very, very important. And the second thing is you want to make sure that you exploit these reservoirs such that you're able to not only sustain, but enhance the productivity and maximize the recovery. There are several drivers, but a few key ones include our ability to develop the right production and reserves delivery expectations, consistently execute to meet or exceed these expectations in a safe and capital efficient manner. And then finally, grow the company's reserves base. Our reserves base is like our bank balance. And as far as growing the company's reserves base, I'm talking about the organic option. What I mean is you can always grow your reserves base by acquiring another company or buying some producing fields or properties. I'm talking about the organic option, wherein you maximize the recovery from your existing fields, exploit sister reservoirs, and then also depend upon your friendly exploration brethren to perhaps make some discoveries close to where you already have a development, such that you're able to tie it back. So this is what we call as infrastructure-led exploration. And then finally, if they are able to make some discoveries in new basins, you have what I call as greenfield exploration. A key financial metric is the dollar per barrel. In order to maximize value, you need to ensure that you decrease the numerator and increase the denominator. You really have to work both sides. And at the end of the day, subsurface excellence, innovation, and digitalization are key to increasing the denominator. Now let me say a few words about the scope. So once you think you have a commercial discovery and you have made the decision to develop the field, this slide shows you the typical stages of a conventional reservoir development starting from the appraise stage. It is a gated process. This slide gives you a feel about how the industry is currently going about its business. Is there an opportunity for improvement? Absolutely. And we're going to talk about that in the class. At the end of the day, a key driver should be to decrease the time it takes from discovery to first oil. But you have to do this in a very deliberate manner. Sometimes you may have to go slow initially to go fast later. You get through the appraise phase and you're able to get through the appraise to select gate if you're able to show that you have, based on the appraisal program, identified multiple development scenarios, and at least one of them is technically and commercially viable. It's not robust because you're still in the preliminary evaluation. So then you go through the appraise to select gate. Now let me say a few words about the define stage. The define stage, which is shown in blue, is a very important stage, and passage through the select to define gate is a very important milestone. At this particular point, what you have basically found is that you have evaluated all your different development concepts that you looked at in the select stage, and you have identified one which looks very promising but needs a little bit more work to go ahead and fund it, get full funding. Now, this gate is a very critical point because you have to make a key decision as to whether you want to stay the course, because you're going to be spending quite a bit of money and using up a lot of resources in the defined state, especially from pre-engineering money's point of view. Or do you want to take the exit and get off the freeway? This is a very important state that you gate, and you have to make sure that you make the right decision. The decision to not do something is as important as the decision to do something. But unfortunately, we don't pay as much attention to this particular principle as perhaps we should. Imagine you say that you and your team have worked your butts off and you are able to sanction the project, you get a high five, you have a celebratory party, and maybe some people get promoted. On the flip side, if you say, I worked for the last 2 years and we have now decided that we're going to make the recommendation to the company to not do this project, maybe you will get a thank you, but there's no celebration. Whereas, in my opinion, the decision to not do something and tell the company not to spend the money is as important as the decision to sanction. But we look at it from different lenses. In reality, a lot of times the project team gets too close to the project and gets into an advocacy mode, if you will. You need to kind of step back and say, what is the best thing for the company? How do we monetize it? Should we go ahead and divest it, or should we actually make money by developing the field? These are key decisions that need to be made, because we are talking about humongous amounts of capital outlays, in order to do some of these subsurface developments, especially in the offshore. So the key is to make an informed decision. You may have a crappy development, but you may choose to do it anyway. Why? Because it may be a country entry development, and you know that if you do this, you will get access to maybe other blocks which have much better potential. But the key is to do it with your eyes wide open and set up the right expectations. At the end of the day, as somebody said, if you have a dog and just because you put lipstick on the dog, it's still a dog, it's not a horse. So need to make sure that we have set up the right expectations and you're making the decision with your eyes wide open. Okay. Now, the next gate, in my opinion, which is the sanction gate, the define to execute gate, the sanction gate is a very holy gate. I may sound like a preacher, but this is when you're asking the corporation for full funding of your project for X billion dollars or whatever it is, and in exchange, you're promising that you will deliver Y million barrels over a certain given period of time at a certain cost. This promise needs to be a solemn promise and needs to be what I mean is a very holy promise, but unfortunately, our industry doesn't take it as seriously as it should. In fact, the industry does not have a very good track record of delivering on our sanction promise in terms of the barrels and in terms of the cost and the schedule. In fact, according to a benchmarking study conducted by IPA, which is a company out of Virginia, close to Washington, D.C., almost 1 in 5 developments experience at least a 20% downgrade in the recoverable volume estimates. Okay. Then once you get funding and the project gets sanctioned, then you go about building the facilities and perhaps drilling a subset of the wells in the red execute stage. And then finally you come to production startup, and then you get into the operate stage where you drill the rest of the wells and then perhaps initiate water injection if that is a part of your plan. Let me say a few words about the headers. So the work that you do in the select and the define stages is about doing the right development, selecting the right subsurface development. And we need to spend a lot of time making sure we do the right thing, okay? Then the work that you do in the execute and the operate stages, I'm talking about actually going past the production startup point, is all about doing the development right. Very, very important, okay? And then finally, you have the third stage, which is all about maximizing the ultimate recovery and converting contingent resources to reserves. Now, a few words about the labels at the bottom. You have what we call is the greenfield development, and the greenfield development classification actually extends right from the appraise stage all the way to beyond production startup into the operate stage when you have finished drilling all your development wells and perhaps initiating water injection. Brownfield development is something that you embark on because you want to go ahead and maximize the amount of oil that you get out of the ground. So it may entail stuff like an infill drilling program, expanding your water flood, developing additional areas of the field, and what have you. Okay. Subsurface excellence and innovation impacts the whole exploitation spectrum. It plays a critical role in all those 3 phases that I mentioned on the previous slide. It is in the first phase, it's all about fit for purpose appraisal of your exploration discoveries. You want to make sure that you collect the right amount of rock and fluid data, do the appropriate amount of dynamic testing in order to get a feel for the minimum connected volume, make an appropriate estimate of the subsurface risks and uncertainties, and really play a key role in selecting the right development concept. Let me kind of give you an example. Let us say you're in the offshore world and you're trying to decide whether you should have a dry tree development or a wet tree development, meaning a remote subsea development, right? Now, remote subsea development will not be as capital intensive as a dry tree development. However, because of lack of intervention or lack of timely intervention, subsea developments typically produce about 5 to 15% less than a dry tree development. So these are factors that you need to keep in mind in selecting the right concept. The next phase is about doing the development right. It is first is to make sure that you size the top sides properly. IPA has found that typically we are oversizing our facility capacity by 30%. We have a lot of our facility colleagues who boast about how they built the biggest facility in Texas. It can process 200,000 barrels per day or whatever. But you find that a lot of them are sucking air because the subsurface has not been able to deliver. So we just need to make an appropriate balance as to what can be done from a standardized point of view and what the subsurface will deliver. And we talk a lot about this in the class. The next is, once you have identified the appropriate number of wells and also the development concept from a facility point of view, it's about developing robust production and reserve delivery expectations, for a high, medium, and low basis. It's about listening to the reservoir once the wells come online, optimizing the reservoir management, and taking the appropriate actions in order to not only sustain, but enhance the reservoir productivity and injectivity to meet or exceed the sanction case. And then the last phase is all about leveraging the reservoir performance data and making sure that you enhance, let's say if you have a water flood going, enhance the water flood recovery, and then look at options to maximize ultimate recovery. Now let me switch gears and say a few words about unconventional reservoirs. It's a completely different world. We talk about whole new world. It is a whole new world. You have a very high well count. The development pace is very fast, and you have a rapid decline in the productivity. Okay. Unconventional field development really is a continuous cycle of project appraisal, learning, optimization, and development, and it entails a series of evolving field appraise and development plans. It is actually all one big stage, if you will. It's not a gated process, as we saw in the previous case with the conventional reservoir development. Somebody was joking that you're actually trying to fly the plane while you're building it. Okay. Now, how do you go about making sure that you're getting your subsurface development right? So let me say a few words about that. We want to talk about this in great detail in the class, but here's a one-slide summary. The key is to examine the characteristics of the proposed subsurface development from different evaluation lenses and ensure that it passes muster from all points of view. So let's talk about each of these lenses. Lens number one is about developing fit-for-purpose models based on the appraisal data. Make sure that you don't build million cell models when you just have 3 appraisal wells. It needs to be fit for purpose, and don't get lulled into a false sense of accuracy when you don't have any. And then benchmarking the recovery factor, but more importantly, benchmarking the recoverable volume per completion. It's not just enough that the recovery factor, let's say your water injection going on and your water flood recovery is about 40 to 45%. It looks reasonable, from the geology and also from the fluid characteristics and the development plan that you've put together. It's also how many wells do you have? Does the recoverable volume per well make sense? Let's say you have 100 million barrels of recoverable and you just have 3 wells. Then on average, each well is supposed to recover 33. Does that make sense in this geology and this development environment? You need to ask the question and make sure you have enough take points, not only from a production, but also from an injection point of view in terms of the injection volume that you're planning to deliver. They have to be reasonable and make sure that it makes sense and you can actually deliver. Okay. Lens number 2 is making sure that you have landed on the right topsides design capacity and developed robust production and injection forecasts and recoverable volume expectations. This is the holy sanction promise, if you will, for the proposed facility capacity and the development well count. Lens number 3 is actually listening to what is happening in the reservoir once you get online, listening to the wells, take the appropriate actions in terms of implementing the right treatments, in terms of operating philosophy, changing it, etc., to make sure that you sustain and enhance the well health to deliver the sanction promise. And lens number 4 is all about maximizing ultimate recovery and look at different brownfield options. At the end of the day, we in the industry are still leaving a lot of oil behind in the ground. And we need to get a bigger bang, or we need to make sure we get the biggest bang for our carbon footprint. We have to really change our mindset and be very deliberate. It's not just about the first sanction project, which makes money. It's actually thinking about the whole spectrum. Let me give you an example. Let us say you're planning to go ahead and develop a field in the Gulf of Mexico, and the geophysicists tell you that, hey, this should be big ass aquifer, so you'll have water drive, you should be able to maintain the pressure, and everything is cool. So option A, you may say, okay, I don't need to have any water injection kit. Or you can say, let me think about two other options. A is, yes, the aquifer should cook in, but we don't know when, and we don't know how strong it is going to be. So maybe you want to think about two options. Option is, okay, maybe I'll leave some space on the top sides and maybe pre-order some long lead items, and then we'll watch the performance for the first few years and then install water injection kit as and when needed, right? So that way you're able to defer the CapEx, but you're thinking about what could happen in the future in order to maximize the ultimate recovery. That is great. But got to keep in mind that doing anything in the brownfield mode when the facility is already offshore is a pain. The other option is you can say, no, I'm going to be more aggressive and I'm going to actually spend the money up front and buy an insurance policy of having the water injection kit installed right from day one. You can do this, onshore, and then that is actually able to save you some money. Of course, you have to spend the capital right up front. So you're buying an insurance policy so that if and when the aquifer doesn't kick in or whatever, then you can turn on the water injection. So you really need to be very deliberate about the whole picture, about how you're going to maximize the recovery from your asset right at the beginning, because then this will influence how you go about designing your facilities and your depletion plan. This slide gives you a feel for the arenas where digital rock technology, machine learning, and artificial intelligence can make a huge impact. And we're going to discuss this in great detail in the class, but let me just kind of give you a few tidbits. In lens number 2, digital rock technology can play a huge role in obtaining relative permeability data on the different facies, which are available, which are present in your reservoir. Typically, relative permeability is obtained maybe on one rock type. It usually takes about 18 months to get the data from the lab. And a lot of times you don't even have the data when you sanction the project. You're making, what I call a scientific wild ass guesses. And relative permeability is a key input which impacts the amount of exploitable oil and also impacts your production forecast. So imagine if you're able to combine digital rock technology with good old-fashioned laboratory testing, validate the DRT, and then use it to generate rel perm curves for the different facies. You will have more confidence in your production forecast, of course, given all the uncertainties. In lens number 3, it is about using machine learning to do real-time data analysis to make sure that you're able to sustain and enhance the well health. And in lens number 4, it's about using digital rock technology and new chemical cocktails to enhance recovery. It's about using machine learning and AI to enhance brownfield oil recovery. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this last topic. Okay. So here's a case study. It's about enhancing digital oil recovery from conventional reservoir brownfield developments. And this technology has been and is being used by several operators in the industry. So before I get into the technology, I just want to say a few words about FDP, just to kind of give you a little bit of context. The FDP, or the Field Development Plan, some people call it the depletion plan, is all about how you are going to exploit your subsurface, handle the wells, the top sides, and all the way to export. It kind of gives you a feel for the whole development picture. Talks about how you're going to develop it, how you're going to produce it, inject it, and recover the oil. And also talks about options to maximize ultimate recovery. You really write the FDP for the first time when you sanction the project, okay? Then you watch the performance of the reservoir for a few years when you're in the operate stage, and you ask the question, hey, is it what I expected to see when I first made the sanction promise several years ago? Very likely it is not, and hopefully it is better than what you expected. Then you would want to go ahead and upgrade your field development plan and say, okay, these are the things that we need to do in terms of reservoir management, or maybe drilling more wells, etc. Then finally, of course, you write a new FDP when you actually embark on a brownfield development. Okay, this technology has really got two components. The digital behavior twin is data and behavior driven. It honors the physics. Okay, so in this technology, they actually look at the pressure and rate data and are able to make inferences about the interaction between wells. So let us say you have two wells, well A and well B. So based on the data and looking at the behavior over the last several years, they're able to find out whether this well is talking to the other well or not. Maybe it has no communication. So there is a fault, or if you can imagine that there is a steel plate between well A and well B. So well A doesn't talk to well B. So it has no impact. They do not have any impact on each other. Or well A is actually whispering to well B. Why? Because there are some small holes in that steel plate. So there is some flow going across and there is some pressure communication. Or well A is yelling at well B because there's no steel plate, if you will, right? There's no faults. So essentially, by examining the pressure data and the rate data over a certain period of time, they're able to figure out the interaction between the different wells, which is the key to how the wells have performed with over a period of time. And based on this, they're able to come up with very good history matches, and then they use the framework to develop production forecasts on a well by well as well as on a field basis. Okay, and typically these models take about 3 months to build, as opposed to year to 18 months, using a traditional Eclipse model, etc. The second part of the technology is about the optimizer. They go ahead and use the mathematical framework that they have built to go ahead and generate millions of FTP scenarios honoring different subsurface, surface, and financial constraints. And what they have found is, by doing this, they're actually able to come up with some cool new scenarios which are not intuitively obvious. And this really helps you get a feel for identifying the ones which are able to maximize the value to the greatest extent. In this slide gives you an example which has actually been published. This is an example of where the technology was used by for a field in Colombia. It was a dark brown field. The production started in 1985, and they actually employed the technology, I believe, in the early 2000s, if you will. It's a field which was operated by Hook Oil, which is a subsidiary of Ecopetrol. Water injection, high water cut, and there are two sands in this reservoir, and 75% of the oil is contained in the upper sand. So they actually ran nearly 400,000 FTPs to identify how many and which producers to convert, how much water to inject in each injector. So it was a lot of reservoir management opportunities that they were looking at. In addition, they also looked at opportunities where they could look at where they could add some wells. At the end of the day, what they found was there were 145 FTPs which they identified which had higher NPV than the operator's in-house plan. The operator at the end of the day decided to go with one of these FTPs and implemented it. And actually, I don't know whether you can see it very clearly, that the actual data fell on the predicted lines, and they were actually able to get about a 20% buzz. And more importantly, this buzz, which was observed over a 2-year period, was actually honored and incorporated into the reserves, which was certified by DNM. So a very good success story out there. Okay. So a few comments about this technology. This applies to conventional brownfield reservoir developments that have enough production and injection data, but there is still some scope to make reservoir management decisions to enhance production, or you can actually have some infill wells. Typically, you need about 7 years of reservoir performance data, and you need about 15 take points, producers and injectors. The technology leverages reservoir data, reservoir physics, machine learning, mathematical modeling, and parallel computing, because they're able to generate a whole bunch of FTPs, which are far superior to what you're able to do given your traditional reservoir simulation tools. The data is linked with mathematical techniques to create a reservoir behavior model that links responses to action based on the past behavior of the field. So the bottom line is the algorithm learns from what has been done already. Okay, so that is the key. So you need a certain amount of data in order to go ahead and train the algorithm. Okay. Now, it's cool to talk about machine learning and artificial intelligence. However, in order to be successful, you need to play in each one of these 3 segments: domain expertise, data validation, and algorithm building, and of course, scalability, in order to be successful in the whole area. So let me start off with the, the black segment. It involves validating the data and then building the algorithms. And it's a 2-part process, and the first part is quote unquote, it's more janitorial, cleaning up stuff, and the second part is the sexy part, right? However, you really need to spend a lot of time making sure that you take care of what I call is the data cleaning part. And unfortunately, in the industry, the average asset engineer, Joe asset engineer, he doesn't even have time. We have Pi servers, especially if you have downhole sensors. The data is coming at you 24/7. We don't have time to even clean it up, right? So this is something where if you're a technology provider and you're working with an operator, you need to be able to see how you can work with each other in order to ingest the data, make sure it's clean. Because if you don't have clean data, if you're not able to make sure that the integrity of the data is okay, your algorithm will not come up with the right recommendations. Then it's not just enough to have a lot of POCs. You need to make sure that it is scalable across the enterprise. Okay. Now, people need to take baby steps. They need to be patient and ensure that you're getting the biggest bang for your buck, because you can get swept away by the wave of digitalization, but you need to make sure at the end of the day that you're getting the biggest bang for your buck. And at the end, I also want to say that you need to be a little bit wary, because there are a lot of what I call digital snake oil salesmen wanting to sell you all kinds of stuff. And I've had experience with that in my previous life, and especially in the unconventional space. And in the unconventional space, as you know, as an industry, we're still trying to figure out what the physics of flow is. We don't know whether Darcy's law is valid. We're still figuring out what is the effect of nanospace on fluid behavior, etc. So we need to be very careful about that. Finally, I want to leave you with a health warning. There needs to be buy-in from the bottom and the top. At the end of the day, leadership defines culture. Culture defines behavior, and behavior defines outcomes. Okay. A lot of the current CEOs and SVPs or whatever, they're all learning. And this is the case for any new thing. I'm not just talking about digitalization, any new technology or anything new. And what happens is when push comes to shove, they go back to their old habits. We need to make sure that we invest in these new technologies, whether they're traditional or digital, even in the downturn. And it is difficult to do that, because if you invest in the downturn, then you'll be able to reap the benefits when the price goes up. As you all know, our industry is very cyclical. It's a commodity-driven price, and the price goes up and down, as we know from history, and it's going to do that. You can see what happened in 2020 when it went negative, for a few days out there, and now it's come back to $80 a barrel. So the key thing at the end of the day is we need to make sure that we have the right culture. We don't have a good track record of doing that. And so what I would suggest to anybody who's trying to introduce new technologies in any company, you need to spend a lot of effort socializing it with the appropriate stakeholders and getting their buy-in, not only from the crews, but also from the guys at the top, so that they're able to sustain, and you have the staying power to go ahead and implement the technology, make sure that it works, the pilots work, then you're able to scale it also. Okay. With that, now to the most important part of the presentation is your questions and feedback. I hope you have enjoyed the material so far and has piqued your interest. I'll be happy to take any questions now or later. Over to you, Susan.
Thank you. I'd like to remind the audience you are muted, but you can ask questions using the Go to Webinar question feature. After attending today's webinar, you'll receive a link later to a recording, an evaluation form, and a link to the registration details for the 2 classes that I mentioned that Srini will be teaching in January. Okay, our first question: what percentage of the developments miss their P90 to P10 range of recoverable volume estimates?
Right, so these are some stats that have been put together by this company called IPA, Independent Project Analysts, and they have said that nearly 30 to 40% of the developments miss the range, and most of them are on the low side. So that's not very, very encouraging. So we really need to improve our track record of delivery in the industry.
So as you mentioned, it's not just volumes, but it's also the time estimates, the schedule estimates, and the dollars
Yes.
being spent. All of those, our industry has a poor track record. What are some of the reasons for our poor track record in forecasting our major capital projects?
So I think some of it is technical, and I would say some of it is cultural. So let's talk about the technical reasons. I mean, even though we've been around the block so long, we still tend to be a little bit optimistic when we are trying to develop forecasts to get our project sanctioned. There's a little bit of an advocacy kind of going on, right, if you will. And I always say that even though we've been around the block, we forget that Murphy lives in the oil patch and he's going to come and get us, okay? So some examples, for example, people have very aggressive production ramp-up programs, okay? And what IPA has found is that in the industry as a whole, we have been able to meet only 80% of the first year production forecast. 80%. So you said in the first year you would average, I'm just saying, 20,000 barrels per day, and you're just getting 16. So this is what the industry has been doing. So we've been having very aggressive forecasts and we have not been able to deliver. And the first year of operability is a tough one, right? Because you're trying to commission stuff, you're trying to get your water injection on. But this happens all the time, but we don't take that into account when we develop our forecast. For example, water injection kits are really treated as stepchildren by our operations guys. Water injection does not produce oil. That's what everybody says, but actually it has a huge role in getting the oil to the producers. So they don't commission it on a timely basis. The water injection system doesn't come on. But what happens is when you make the forecast, we're assuming that we have an uptime of 90% from day one, which doesn't happen. So we just need to make sure that we have more realistic assumptions, if you will. The second point I want to make is more cultural. And I think, I'm not sure it's in all companies, but in some companies, I would say there's a little bit of a lack of accountability for delivering on the sanction case. A lot of time, the guy who sanctions the project moves on, and it's a delivery manager who takes on. So, so he says, well, who sanctioned this project? Who made this promise? And the guy who made the promise, has been transferred and he's working in Australia or something like that. So I think we need to maybe tie a portion of our bonus incentives to how well the project did, etc., but increase the level of accountability, because in my opinion, the sanction promise is a holy promise and you need to kind of deliver. So those are some of the reasons that come to my mind.
Thank you. What's the industry average for typical ultimate recovery factors in conventional and in unconventional oil reservoirs?
Okay. In conventional reservoirs, I would say, it ranges anywhere from about 40 to 60%. So we're actually leaving 40 to 60% of the oil behind. And that's what I'm kind of looking at. And then in the unconventional oil reservoirs, the recoveries, just doing drilling and fracking is less than 10%. So we're leaving over 90% of the oil behind. I mean, we're leaving a lot of oil behind. And so, yes, the projects that we have implemented, they're economic, but I think we need to look at it from a more holistic point of view and see what we can do in terms of maximizing the bang, for your carbon footprint.
What's the minimum number of years of reservoir performance history and number of wells needed to apply the digital twin technology that you discussed? And could you use an analog field if your field hasn't started producing yet?
So let me answer that first question. So, I said you need about 7 years of performance, if you will. So, and about 15 take points. I think from having a good confidence, I have been told that you need at least 5 years of performance and 10 take points. No, and with respect to the performance, you need it from your own field. Analogs are not going to be that helpful because you're actually looking at the data from the actual take points to see what you can do in terms of changing the reservoir management methodology for those wells in question, and converting producers to water injectors and so on and so forth. So it really has to be the field.
We talked about the stage gate process for projects, and do you advocate the use of peer reviews at each of the stage gates to prepare for approval or for sanction?
Yes, and I think so. Let me make a couple of comments on that. Peer reviews or assurance reviews or whatever you want to call them. So I think we need to make sure that we have what I call is a cold eyes review, right? Because it's not, you calling a bunch of your buddies and, they say, yeah, okay. These need to be people who are experienced with similar developments and also have some cold eyes. And I would say keep the same set of cold eyes for all the different stages, because a lot of times you have different people, they're not familiar with what you said at the end of the select gate, and so they ask you the same questions, etc. So there's a lot of inefficiencies in the system going on right now. And number two, I would also say that the people who come for the assurance as well as the project team should both be held kind of responsible for the success of the project, so that they take this very, very seriously. It's not just, I'm talking about the olden days. We're getting on a plane and taking a ride to go ahead and do a peer review. And a lot of times, people don't have the time to look at the material which they have been given. They just look at it on the plane, so they're not able to really provide sage advice, because this is serious business. So I think we have to address both those issues, and some of it is cultural, if you will.
And certainly accountability is a big part of this. Do you advocate the use of after action reviews after a project has been completed to see if it met all the expectations and predictions of the project?
Absolutely. And so let me tell you what happens, right now. So typically, who is spending the most amount of money between sanction and first oil? It's the facilities guys, right? And what are they worried about? Cost and schedule. So usually what happens is, they get this outside consultant to do an after action review, and they do it literally after first oil, in a month after, because, the facilities team is getting disbanded, and they want to get a good feel for how did it go with respect to cost and schedule. But that's really only one part of the story. We haven't even started producing. We don't even know how the subsurface is doing. So I would say that yes, you can collect some data at first oil, but I think you should look at a couple of after action reviews. One after action review would perhaps should be done maybe after a year or two, because the first year you have a lot of operational issues. You're trying to get your act together, your water injection kit is not working, etc. So absolutely have one, maybe 1 to 2 years after first oil. And then I would also say you should have a second one after 5 years, because in most cases, you don't have your water injection going on. And since water injection would be probably responsible for a substantial portion of the recoverable volume, you want to see how it's doing. So I would say maybe 2 or 5 years, after I've had the water injection going on for 2 years. So absolutely agree. And we need to do it, have after action review. They're invaluable. And the key thing is to codify and make sure those lessons learned are not just written up and put on the company's intranet. They need to be made sure that the assurance guys, implement them and disseminate them with the project team, which is in place, and also for future project teams.
So you talked about the triggers that you might use to determine when to upgrade an FDP, and then you talked about really using the digital twins to show more continuous updates. Do you envision a living document for your field development plan that's always up to date?
So yes, it's a living document for sure. But you see, when I talked about the digital twin, it came up with a bunch of FTPs at that particular point in time, given the historical data as of that particular point, right? Okay. So now, if you go further, say 2 years, etc., and you've already chosen a field development plan, it kind of looks at the data and it updates it. All right. Now, I would say yes, it needs to be a living document. And I would say in terms of actually have a quote unquote official upgrade, you would want to do it when you're finding that your performance is deviating quite a bit, from what you said at sanction. I'm just going to use a number, let's say 15%. Your recoverable volume estimates are 15% different. If it is different, if it is lower, then you have to take some actions in terms of, do I need to drill more wells, or more injectors, etc. So that would be a change in the field development plan and an upgrade, if you will.
You talked about some of the FTP scenarios being not intuitively obvious. Can you give us some examples of what that might look like?
So this is based on what I have been told about how the digital rock technology has been used. So it was the case that we were looking at was an example is, it was not just from a subsurface. There were two examples. One, which was from a subsurface point of view, where they actually found out that what if there was a huge degree of compartmentalization, if you will, number one, okay? And then what would you want to do in terms of the debottlenecking of the facility? Would that kind of help, if you will? Okay, so these were things, yeah, you think about debottlenecking and you think about compartmentalization, etc., but this kind of quantifies the impact a little bit more and makes it more transparent.
Excellent. Well, I think that's all the time we have today for questions. So I'd like to remind our attendees that you will receive a link to a recording of today's webinar, an evaluation form, and a link to the registration details for the 2 classes that are offered in January: Maximizing Upstream Oil and Gas Exploitation Value by Leveraging Subsurface Excellence, Innovation, and Digitalization. That one's offered live online, mornings in the Americas, January 24th and 25th. And then the second class is Developing Robust Production Forecast Do's and Don'ts. That's also offered virtually, live online, 8 to 12, January 26th through 27th, 2022. Thanks for attending today's presentation. Goodbye.
Thanks, Susan.
Bye.